That's a lot of responsibility to carry as the firstborn, right? And I think
Yes.
I'm identifying a little bit because I was also the firstborn and also the first doctor in my family. There were quite a few after me, but, and what in your mind makes it harder for someone whose family haven't been to university? What's it like to be the first generation to have that opportunity?
I think that it puts a lot of, as I said, pressure on you to really excel. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have a choice but to be excellent because there's so
Mm-hmm.
much riding on you. There's so many people that are riding on your success or your story of success because it's never been told before. I
Mm-hmm.
remember when I did Miss South Africa, my entire community of Matatiele, we have a little shop right in the center,
Mm-hmm.
and people went there, bought tickets for me and voted for me, even though that was their last cent. They just made sure that they were out there
Wow.
supporting me no matter what. And when they watched me on the stage, they all just sent me the videos of them screaming in the living room, rooting for me because they couldn't get to the venue themselves. The venue was in Cape Town at the time. And
Right.
those are the small things that really resonate with me to show that it matters. Chasing your
Mm.
dreams matters. Kind of being different and thinking out of the box does matter. It's made me somebody that isn't afraid to fail because I've had to be on a stage in front of millions of people,
Mm-hmm.
basically, because people from around the world would watch in South Africa. And so I can speak in front of anyone now.
Yeah, I imagine that's a steep learning curve. And I think it probably takes a lot of courage. I don't know if I'd be brave enough to do it.
I think it's something that actually ties in with me being a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
I think that something happens to your brain when you see so many people take their last breath. People just have really difficult lives. And I think you see people at their worst as a doctor. And it's something that's really taught me to cherish every single moment. And I've taken it and almost ran with it in the sense that I just think I only have this one life and I need to maximize it as much as possible. And some people don't understand it when I say it, but it's just something that I just feel has really powered my desire and my motivation to better myself.
Welcome. I'm Dr. Maria Christodoulou, and this is the Awakening Doctor podcast, a space where we discover the personal stories of those who work in the medical and health professions. Join me as I explore the hopes, the fears, the aspirations, and the real-life challenges of those who carry the title, responsibility, and privilege of being a doctor. So joining myself and producer Amy Kay today is Dr. Moratwe Masima, a young doctor who completed her community service last year and is currently working as a medical officer in a public sector hospital in Gauteng. Welcome, Moratwe. It's lovely to have you with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on the podcast.
Great. Well, we're happy to have you. And hi, Amy. It's nice to see you again.
Nice to meet you, Maria. Nice to meet you, Moratwe. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
So, where should we begin? Where do we start to tell the story of Dr. Moratwe Masima?
I actually am originally from Midrand, Gauteng. My parents are from the rural Eastern Cape in a very, very small rural town called Matatiele. And I was fortunate enough to be born actually in the hospital that I ended up being an intern at. So it was quite a full circle moment. I grew up in a very happy, healthy family environment and decided that I really wanted to work hard in school because growing up in a middle class family that also has the background that we do have of previous disadvantage, there's just a lot that you see and want to make better for your family. So I decided that I would work really hard in high school and I got a scholarship to go to Stellenbosch University to study medicine. And that basically leads me to get into medical school, which I attended for 6 years. Very grueling, difficult 6 years where I think I found myself and also lost myself. And I moved back to Gauteng. I then did my internship for 2 years and then 1 year of community service in psychiatry and internal medicine. And now I'm a medical officer, currently in family medicine and also pursuing the business side of medicine. I am going into aesthetics and I call myself a medical influencer because there's actually a lot of things that I do outside of my job that are medical related. I love giving educational videos on social media because I think there's so much that is out there that is definitely not factual and not from healthcare professionals. And I think it's afforded me a beautiful career opportunity where I get to work with different brands now. One of the most recent ones was the United Nations. I work now with ProfMed as one of their ambassadors. So yes, I have a very full plate.
When we met the other day, you told me that you don't think of yourself as a typical doctor. Do you want to say more about that?
Yes, definitely. I don't think that I'm the most typical doctor because I think I felt the urge already in medical school that I just want to do more than just be a clinician. I see the value and I see the beauty of being a clinician, and I do think that I have those specific characteristics that make me a good doctor. I'm empathetic, I'm knowledgeable, and I'm just somebody that really wants to be better for my patients every single day. But I've always had this inkling that there's something more out there that is more exciting and also just really fulfills my creative outlets. So I entered Miss South Africa in my first year of being a doctor, which is a very scary thing to do, I think, not only just for myself, but for anyone. I was doing 24-hour calls and having to do a photo shoot the next day and still smile and still look as fresh-faced as everyone else. Being in Miss South Africa really taught me how to be a really good time manager, but also how to work under pressure, because I had to be perfect at everything, not only at work, but perfect in front of the camera, perfect in front of South Africans who are judging you, and also looking at the other contestants that I was competing against. There were 9 other beautiful women that were just as capable. And it was just a very life-changing experience. I think that it's made me the person that I am now. I'm able to handle high pressure situations quite well, but I also have to teach myself not to take on too much because then I burn out. It's quite an interesting journey.
I'm sure. And I'm intrigued by the part of you that says, you have to be perfect. You have to be perfect at work. You have to be perfect in front of the camera.
Yes.
Do you feel that you're perfect?
I do not feel that I'm perfect, but I
Right.
do think that I have aspirations of being perfect.
How's that
As
working for
impossible
you?
as that sounds, it's not working well.
So
Yes,
you
I
were a
think
runner-up in the Miss SA, if I remember correctly.
yes, I was runner-up. I was runner-up with another contestant. They chose a top 3 that year, and we worked with the Miss South Africa organization for a year as brand ambassadors. So I had to do collaborations and work with different brands like Mercedes, a variety of different makeup brands like L'Oreal. It's been a beautiful journey filled with ups and downs. It's been interesting.
You said that it's played a big part in who you are today. So what did you learn about yourself in participating in a competition like that?
I would say that I learned that I'm very resilient. It brought out the most either vulnerable parts of myself that I didn't even know existed, mainly because I had to be honest with myself and realize that I can't do it all.
You wanted us to start telling the story at the beginning with your childhood, and you said your parents were born in the rural Eastern Cape. You grew up in Johannesburg. Tell us a bit about your family, about what it was like to visit friends and family in the Eastern Cape, but also how many siblings you had. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what that was like.
So I'm actually the oldest of 3 children, and being a firstborn daughter is very, very daunting and stressful, as most people would know. And there's a lot of pressure that is put on the firstborn. And I think that that's also the reason why I ended up going into medicine in the first place, because in a lot of families, especially underprivileged backgrounds, you have the sense that there's only certain career paths that are worthy. You're either a lawyer, an engineer, or a doctor, and nothing else makes sense. And because I come from a long line of people that unfortunately did not get the chance to go to university or even get proper education. My mom is a teacher, for example. My dad is self-employed. He's in business. I felt the need to almost prove myself that I could do hard things because no one else had done it before in my family. I am the first doctor in my entire family. There's not even a single person that I could look up to and say they have achieved, I don't want to say the level of success that I have, but I've had to be my own beacon of hope. It's been quite a jarring experience. It's been humbling. And I think that it's also been something that I've had to learn comes with a lot of sacrifices because I am learning on the go. And because of that, I make mistakes sometimes. Sometimes I don't have time for family and people don't understand. And a good example is doing 24-hour calls and not being available for Christmas holidays or weddings, birthdays. Family members don't understand that sort of stuff because no one else has ever been in healthcare except for me.
Right. That's a lot of responsibility to carry as the firstborn, right? And I think I'm identifying a little bit because I was also the firstborn and also the first doctor in my family. There were quite a few after me, but, and what in your mind makes it harder for someone whose family haven't been to university? What's it like to be the first generation to have that opportunity?
I think that it puts a lot of, as I said, pressure on you to really excel. You don't have a choice but to be excellent because there's so much riding on you. There's so many people that are riding on your success or your story of success because it's never been told before. I remember when I did Miss South Africa, my entire community of Matatiele, we have a little shop right in the center, and people went there, bought tickets for me and voted for me. Even though that was their last cent, they just made sure that they were out there supporting me no matter what. And when they watched me on the stage, they all just sent me the videos of them screaming in the living room, rooting for me because they couldn't get to the venue themselves. The venue was in Cape Town at the time.
Right.
And those are the small things that really resonate with me to show that it matters. Chasing your dreams matters. Kind of being different and thinking out of the box does matter. It's made me somebody that isn't afraid to fail because I've had to be on a stage in front of millions of people, basically, because people from around the world would watch in South Africa. And so I can speak in front of anyone now.
Yeah, I imagine that's a steep learning curve. And I think it probably takes a lot of courage. I don't know if I'd be brave enough to do it.
I think it's something that actually ties in with me being a doctor. I think that something happens to your brain when you see so many people take their last breath. People just have really difficult lives. And I think you see people at their worst as a doctor. And it's something that's really taught me to cherish every single moment. And I've taken it and almost ran with it in the sense that I just think I only have this one life and I need to maximize it as much as possible. And some people don't understand it when I say it, but it's just something that I just feel has really powered my desire and my motivation to better myself.
Right.
It's so interesting that you mentioned how being a doctor helped you be on stage in front of millions of people. Because I read somewhere that biologically, people are more afraid of public speaking than they are of dying. That's a fact. So people be at their own funeral than speaking at their own funeral. And biologically, the reason why people have such high anxiety or fear or panic attacks when they have to do public speaking is because however many hundreds of years ago, the only time that people had to stand in front of crowds of people was when they were going to be put to their death. Biologically, your body is going, I'm going to die. And that's why you have that feeling. So it's so interesting that you've flipped that. So instead of going, I'm going to die, you go, well, I'm not going to die. So
yes.
I can do this. Like, what's the worst? I'm not at death's door, so I won't die, so I'll be okay.
That's such an interesting story. I did not know that.
I was going to say the one strategy I use to manage my own anxiety and that I often recommend to clients is like when the mind's racing ahead into the future and worrying about all sorts of crazy shit, then I go, is anyone going to die? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. Sometimes in the line of work that I do, it might be true that someone is going to die. Then my anxiety is warranted and then I need to pay attention to that. So it's a little bit different. So here you are, growing up in this environment where there's pressure to succeed, where you feel pressure to succeed, to make life better for your family and to rise above the circumstances you've grown up in. What takes you to medical school other than you could be doctor, lawyer, engineer? Like, why medical school?
That's such an interesting question because I don't necessarily follow I would say the prototype of why most people became a doctor. I think that I just really was drawn towards science-related topics and subjects in high school. I thought I was going to become a chemical engineer. I actually shadowed chemical engineers only. And I think it was in matric that I got the opportunity to go to Stellenbosch for a week. And that was just an eye-opener for me that there was the career, obviously being a doctor. My perception of a doctor back then was my GP. And that was the only person that I knew that was a doctor. I didn't have much insight other than, okay, they work in hospital, the shows that you watch on TV, but I know nothing else about it. So that week at Stellenbosch actually made such a big impact on me because I realized that I have the desire to make a difference and make an impact. And I also want to integrate that with science in some sort of way. And I thought that it was a good culmination of the two. I do wish, however, that I had more exposure to it because I think that working as a doctor now is very different to what I envisioned as 18-year-old Moratwe, because I'm 28 now. And that's exactly 10 years ago that I made that decision. It's also quite jarring that we expect 18-year-olds to know what their life purpose actually is, because you change as you grow. And a lot of people, when they choose medicine, feel pressured that they can't leave or they can't make different choices because you chose such a noble profession. There's certain aspects that have drawn me to medicine other than just wanting to make a difference to people's lives. There's a certain level of financial security that it brought that I think I felt that other careers potentially might have not. But we all know now that the situation has changed completely and the landscape has changed as well. So it's quite interesting how life evolves.
So what did 18-year-old Moratwe think medical school was going to be about?
I just thought that it was me studying all day. So I actually love studying. I sit in the library. I don't mind sitting for hours and reading through anything. And so I envisioned that process and I envisioned that as my university experience. I did not envision myself going into hospital. And I know it sounds abnormal because it doesn't make sense. Of course, you're going to go into the hospital. And I think it was in second year that we started our exposure to practicals. And it was just quite an overwhelming feeling walking into the wards, seeing everything, because public hospitals, especially when you're that young, I think first time I was 19 that I saw someone get resuscitated in the casualty. And I think that that was a very overwhelming feeling. And it really opened my eyes to what I've signed up for, because I was already in second year. It's going to be very odd to turn back and say, maybe this is not for me, because I always think about that patient, because it was my first time that I witnessed someone dying. And I think when people always ask me, how does it feel being a doctor? Or how does it feel seeing someone die? It's such an odd thing when I don't show emotion the way I used to. You just become desensitized. There's patients in the ward. As I mentioned, I was in internal medicine and there's resusces every day in the ward. You resus for 30 minutes and whatever the outcome is the outcome. And then you have to move on to your 30 plus patients that are still waiting for you, and casualty is calling and the nurses want to drip. And so you just learn to cope. I do think that I enjoy medicine now because I'm out of internship and out of community service. I think that being a little bit more autonomous is better for me.
So what was it like to witness that first resus and to see a patient die? I think there are probably 16, 17, 18-year-olds right now who are thinking about medical school, who haven't thought about those things. How did you make sense of that experience? How did you make meaning of it? You talk about now kind of not responding in the same way emotionally. So when you look back, what was that experience like? What did it really mean for you?
I think that it just highlighted the gravity of my decision and the gravity of the profession that I chose. It also made me work harder, because I think that in medicine, when I mentioned at the beginning that I feel like I need to be perfect at work and you also need to be perfect in front of the camera, to a certain extent, you do need to be perfect at work because you're working with human lives. And so that incident scared me because I remember that I had an exam probably on the Friday and this happened on the Tuesday, and I hadn't studied as hard as I had wanted to. And I remember going back to my res room later that day and burning the night oil because I panicked and thought to myself, I cannot be the doctor that lets someone die.
Sure.
And that was one of my first thoughts. The second was, this is a scary job. And I think that's when I started realizing just how heavy of a profession it is. And I also started noticing my friends. We did not have good coping mechanisms at all. And a lot of people just thought they were fine, but they actually weren't. A lot of people in medical school were on antidepressants or anxiety medication, and that was almost the norm. And I think it just highlighted the gravity of what we see and how much it affects us. But a lot of the times you just sweep it under the rug or you keep it moving because you are in a cohort of mostly highly intelligent people that have worked hard to get to where they are. And it's very difficult to be vulnerable when you are a part of the top students of the country. There's a lot of expectation from you.
Right. What do you wish you had known at 18 that you didn't know?
I wish that I had known that there's different ways to get to where you want to be. I think that with myself, I have been redirected so many times in my life and in my career, not by my own doing, but by God's will. There's certain things that I've tried that have just not worked out for me, but I knew that I wanted a certain outcome. And years later, I only see now that I'm actually going towards that outcome, but it's coming in a different way. And I think that I would tell 18-year-old Moratwe that she doesn't need to follow this one life path because there's other ways to be successful.
Does that mean you might have made a decision not to finish medical school?
I think that I would have made the decision not to sign up for medicine, actually. I think that I would have just been as happy as an engineer. And I think that now, especially now, there's so many ways that you can make impact. I go back to what I said. I wanted to make a difference in people's lives. And I think that my perception of making a difference in people's lives was physically. Now there's so many ways you can do that. We have access to social media where you can share things and be your authentic self, and it can actually make a difference in someone else's life. You can work with nonprofit organizations if you really want to. There's so many different avenues.
So if you could rewind the clock, what would you do? Chemical engineering, or is there something else that you might pursue, knowing what you know today?
Knowing what I know today, very interestingly, I think I would have gone into something like coding, AI. And the reason why I say this is because the world is changing, whether we like it or not. And actually, my brother is a software engineer and he works for Momentum. And my sister also is studying coding. She's actually in matric at the moment and she's studying coding. And I'm just so intrigued by what they talk about and the fact that they can develop apps and websites in like a day. It's exciting for me. And I think that I've always just liked that sort of stuff, but I always stopped myself because back then when I was 18, these careers were not lucrative and these careers basically didn't exist.
I was going to say, I'm sure when you were 18, 10 years ago, I don't think we were talking about AI the way we're talking about today.
No, we weren't. And so I definitely am a girl in STEM regardless. I think that I would have fallen somewhere in the spectrum of either health, technology, or science.
So how did you get through medical school? What was that like for you?
Medical school was difficult. Medical school, honestly, I think medical school changed me for better and for worse. I think that the first year was challenging for me because I had to transition from being a top student in high school to being in a sea of great people and top students as well in their own schools. And I found myself struggling to keep up with the workload. I found myself struggling to keep up with the change of environment. I grew up in Midrand. Now it's a bigger suburb, but back then it was a relatively small suburb. Moved all the way to Cape Town away from my family, and I was just in a foreign place and had to make it work. And all of these changes just overwhelmed me. I'm actually surprised that I made it through first year without failing anything because there were so many people that in my year that didn't make it or had to repeat something. And, you know, being, I would say, type A, that is your biggest fear, is failing anything, really. And I got through first year. Second year was slightly better. Still a lot of workload, but I think I was starting to get a hang of what university is actually about. And then I think third year was when I started having difficulty with just being in medical school. I don't know how to put it. It came to the fact that we had just so much workload that you would feel overwhelmed. And I remember thinking to myself, I need to go see a psychologist because I was on the brink of burnout and on the brink of a breakdown. And the difficulty with being in that situation is that you see everybody else and you think that they're doing well. Right. Or you compare yourself to others. When the marks come out, you're just a number but you can actually see other people's marks and you see that, oh wow, people are actually surviving this place and you're just scraping through. Another problem for me was that I couldn't actually relate to anyone back home. So I would call my mom and tell her my issues, but there would be no resolution to it because she didn't understand. She truly could not understand what medical school feels like. I think that only people who've gone through medical school understand just how much despair you can get through and just negative feelings about yourself that you can start to develop because you feel like you're not good enough, regardless of how much work you put in. And I think that was a difficult thing to accept and go through because I was working so hard. My marks just weren't reflecting that. And that was difficult.
Yeah.
I think third year was also the first time I had to rewrite a test, not a module per se, but a test. And that was also a very humbling experience. You get the email that says you didn't pass, and so you need to rewrite. And then it's embarrassing, firstly, because you're now going to walk into the examination room with everybody else that's rewriting. It's quite a humbling experience, but I've learned to shake the feeling of shame. I think that back then I really cared a lot about what people thought about me and my ability. And I think I put pressure on myself as well because, as I said, I was on a bursary and there was a lot at stake. My parents couldn't afford my university fees, and so I had to make it work.
And was the bursary the reason you went to Stellenbosch specifically? I was curious about why Stellenbosch all the way from the Midrand.
Yes. So Stellenbosch definitely was not my first choice. I had applied at actually all of the universities in South Africa. I think I applied at 7 universities for medical school, but medical school was actually my second choice. First choice was chemical engineering. And at some universities, I got in for chemical engineering. I think the University of Pretoria, I got in for chemical and UCT as well. And then my first choice for medicine was UCT. I think it's just the perception of prestige that people have regarding UCT. You read and it says it's the best university in Africa and you see the beautiful pictures and the mountain and everything and you just think UCT is the answer. And then, of course, I got offered the Stellenbosch University bursary. And I had a difficult time deciding whether I was going to go to Stellenbosch or not, especially back then, 10 years ago. There definitely still was the perception of what racial experiences am I going to go and experience there. And I come from Gauteng where people are quite open. Everybody lives quite peacefully with each other most of the time. And I just couldn't imagine myself putting myself in an environment where I could potentially be discriminated against simply because I exist the way I exist. And that was a tough choice to make because I didn't want to change my perception of myself and I didn't want my environment to change the perception of myself. And I chose Stellenbosch just out of the fact that I knew that I would come out with my MPCHB at the end of the day. And whether it was from Stellenbosch or UCT, I would still be a doctor regardless of whatever experiences I would encounter. But I would say that I actually don't regret going to Stellenbosch. I ended up really enjoying it. And I think that the experience made me appreciate where I come from a lot. And also, I do think that Stellenbosch does produce really great doctors. I think that we're thrown into the deep end very early, and there is merit to that. As much as we suffer through the process, I do believe that I'm a better doctor for it.
And your experience of Stellenbosch, I mean, you say now that you're not sorry that you went there. You had a perception of how it might be and some concern about how you might experience it. How different was it to what you imagined? What was different, if anything?
My perception of it was based on what I saw on the media. So the news, every time you saw anything regarding Stellenbosch University, it was something racial happened. It was just always quite negative in that sense. I think that firstly, the medical school is away from the town. We're actually based in Tygerberg. And I think that that potentially made a difference because I was surrounded by people that were from, majority of us actually were from different provinces. Almost all of my friends that I ended up making there were from Limpopo, Northwest, KZN, also some from the Western Cape, of course, and a lot from Gauteng. So I think a lot of us had similar experiences of coming from a different province and coming to the medical campus. what also helped is the fact that I do think that being healthcare or health professional students may have made a difference, because I think that we are taught to be empathetic. Not everybody is, and not everybody has that experience at all, but I think it does kind of contribute to your experience that you are supposed to be kind to people and you can't just discriminate. But what I do think what I experienced in a hospital setting was very different.
In what way?
It depends on which hospital you were placed at for which rotation. There were certain rotations that we had to leave Tygerberg, go to, for example, Paarl or Vista or Ceres or any other place. And I vividly remember in my family medicine rotation having to go to Vista. Just the stark differences started to show that I'm really in almost like a foreign place. Firstly, the ward rounds were being done in Afrikaans, and I did Afrikaans in high school, so it's not even that I didn't understand what was going on, but it was just the clear disregard for everyone else that was in the ward round. So the students that didn't understand Afrikaans, it was myself and my clinical partner, and I think another student, and we were all Black. And even if you did raise this concern, they would almost like, oh yes, sorry about that, and then they would change to English. But it would happen so often that you would stop trying to correct them. And I remember I almost felt so disillusioned that I went back to the race that we were staying at, and I was just like, I'm not going to even try anymore. I'm not going to try to answer questions. I'm just going to go sit in my little corner because that's clearly what they are trying to do. That's how it felt. And I just remember thinking to myself, I just need to get through this block, leave this little town, and go back to Tygerberg as soon as possible. That was basically just my perception of the whole experience. It was not pleasant. I think another thing is when you are isolated like that in certain towns as a student, you not only experience it in the hospital environment, when you do go out into the town itself and you're wearing scrubs. And for example, I remember vividly going into a Pick and Pay with my clinical partner. We were both wearing scrubs and people just were staring at us like we were so alien. And I don't know if it was simply that we were wearing scrubs and that we were potentially doctors, that people just couldn't make sense that how are they Black doctors? I don't know how to put it. Another incident was working in casualty in Paarl, and patients specifically requesting that no, they don't want you, they want that other doctor, and they will point to your white male colleague. And those were the things that always just made me think, am I in the right place? I don't feel like I belong.
Sure. I'm sorry that happened to you. That's really hard.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's taught me to stand up for myself. Let me put it that way.
So what were some of the highlights of medical school for you?
The highlights, honestly, are that I made lifelong friends, that I think that, you know, when you go through something as long as 6 years with people, you see them grow from being 18 and you leave medical school at the age of 24 as young adults. And it's definitely been something that I've cherished because they have been my support structure from the moment I walked in the res room feeling timid and shy and scared to make friends to now even working as a doctor. One of my colleagues who's currently in urology, I'll ask some questions. Somebody in pediatrics, I'll ask for help because I know that I'm not as knowledgeable on these particular topics as I used to be. And I think it's those small things that have really just made me feel like it was a group effort. We all kind of carried each other to the finish line, especially in final year, because we could all see how exhausted we were. But it was the late night group study sessions during COVID, because my class was the class of 2020 that graduated during COVID. We had our final year. Yes, we had our final year during COVID. While everybody else in the country was in lockdown, we were called back to university because they said all final year medical students need to go back to their universities to complete because we need you as intern doctors. I remember feeling so isolated because we were away from our families. We all did not know how COVID would turn out. We had our classmates succumb to the COVID-19 virus, and we were the people that were going into the wards exposed to the virus and had to come back and study and just envision that we're going to graduate and our families are not going to see us graduate. I still feel so hurt by that. I have my certificate and I've put it in a beautiful frame and everything, but I don't even have proper graduation pictures at all. And I've always told myself that I need to at least take a graduation picture for myself just for that memory, because you go through those 6 years and you work so hard, and at the finish line, there was nothing for us.
How did graduation work for your class?
We just had an oath-taking ceremony, but that was online. And then we had like a group picture in our gowns. But Amy's laughing.
I had a similar experience. I also didn't get to go to my graduation, and I also have that regret of like, I worked so hard and I didn't get that.
Exactly.
You all have that image in your mind of the cap and gown and being handed the certificate.
Yes.
If you don't have it, it's like, really?
This is it. And I think for me, what was so painful was my parents not seeing me walk on the stage. I've always just had this dream of making them proud and happy. I mean, I know that they were, because I ended up graduating anyway.
Right.
But it was just that moment that we didn't have.
I don't know if I've spoken about this on the podcast before, but on the day that I graduated, I was also the first generation to go to medical school. And my grandfather, who grew up in a very small rural part of Cyprus, was very proud of the fact that my brother and I were in medical school by that stage. And we were the first generation to get to go to university and, of course, the first doctors. And so he traveled all the way from Cyprus to be at my graduation. And he would have been in his 70s at the time. And then we sat in the hall at Stellenbosch, and the audience was asked to please hold back on clapping because there were so many of us that it takes forever if they clap each time somebody gets called up. So they said that we'd read the names and have everybody go past, and once the whole class had got their degree, then the audience could clap for everyone in one go. And my grandfather just could not contain himself. He flew up when they said my name and he started clapping and going, bravo, bravo, bravo. It's taken me years to actually realize what it might have meant for him to witness one of his grandchildren cross the stage and be capped as a doctor. So I do think you lost something, and I think it's okay to be sad about that. There is a loss.
Yes, I do agree. Luckily, I just completed my HIV diploma, so I will definitely be walking on the College of Medicine's stage, and my family will be there.
Excellent. Tell us more. Why HIV?
I did my diploma in HIV because I was in internal medicine last year. And as I said, I am now in family medicine. So it's an important diploma to have. HIV medicine is ever changing. And I think that it's one of the most important diplomas if you are going to be in a medicine or medical stream. So if you want pediatrics or internal medicine or family medicine, I think even psychiatry could be quite helpful. If I were to specialize, because I haven't decided yet if I want to specialize, I would have probably chosen dermatology. So I do need my diploma in HIV if I do go into dermatology.
Say more about that. Why would you need the diploma in HIV? I'm sure there's people that don't know.
Oh, yes. So there are specific prerequisites that you need before you're accepted as a medical officer in a specific specialty. So if you want to go into anesthesiology, then you need to do a diploma in anesthesia. If you want pediatrics, then you need to do a diploma in child health. So for dermatology, there is the diploma in HIV that you need to do. Diploma in allergology is also quite helpful. You need research experience as well, and some MO time in dermatology, which is very, very hard to come by.
I will admit that in preparing for today's conversation, I Googled Dr. Moratwe Masima and I found your YouTube channel. And one of the videos that you've made there was talking about what it's like to be exposed to HIV as a doctor in the clinical setting and to need to take antiretrovirals to protect yourself when you've been exposed. How often has that happened to you?
That has happened to me exactly 3 times. The first time it happened to me was 5th year of medical school in obstetrics and gynecology. And I think that that is actually what started my disdain for obstetrics. I've just not liked it since then. I was delivering a baby and I remember not having a visor on. I had placental fluid fly into my eye. And I remember not panicking at the moment, but I do recall finishing with the delivery and thinking to myself, okay, I need to do something about this because the patient was HIV positive.
Right.
Yes, she was taking her ARVs, but I still felt uncomfortable. And so I alerted my registrar, and then they took me to the nurse, and I had to do the whole occupational health situation where they take your bloods. At the time, what they used to do is that they would give you a 3-day course of the ARVs, and then you would have to go to the doctor, and then they would give you results. Then they would give you your 28-day course of the ARVs. Now they just give it to you straight up. The second time was as an intern doctor, also in obstetrics and gynecology, but that was a needle stick injury. It was around 3 a.m. in the morning, and I was trying to take blood from a patient. And of course, I pricked myself because I had not slept for the whole day. And I was taking blood in basically the dark because there was load shedding.
Oh, my word.
And this patient was HIV positive and not taking any treatment. And so, of course, that definitely scared me, and I had to be on the ARVs. The third time was in community service, internal medicine, in the wards. I think we were doing a resuscitation. And of course, resusces are chaotic. Someone is screaming in the one corner. The nurses are running around trying to get the medication. You're trying to be on the patient's chest, giving CPR. Someone is on the oxygen. And I remember taking blood and then pricking myself in that situation because it was such a small room and there were too many people around. And so I had to, once again, be on another course. They have been quite, I don't know how to put the feeling when you have to do your follow-up visits and do a repeat HIV test. You really do sit with yourself and contemplate what happens if it does come up positive. I think the chances are 0.3% according to literature. In fact, it's higher chance to get hepatitis over HIV, but you know how it is. We're always so afraid of HIV. And I think that actually me doing the diploma helped me a lot with my potential perception of HIV as well. Even as a doctor, I don't think that it's necessarily that, oh my goodness, I'm so afraid of this one disease. But I do think that people especially just feel like it's a life sentence.
Right.
And HIV medicine has come such a long way, such a long way, that I don't think that I would respond the same way that I did before if it did happen again. I would still obviously have a bit of fear, but I think that back then I genuinely felt like, oh, this is the end of the world.
And I guess it's easy to say that you might react differently now because you're not in the situation. And I was thinking, as you were telling us the 3 examples, that you tell the stories quite matter-of-factly. And I remember my own first big injury, which was also in obstetrics. So clearly there's a trend there. But I was assisting in a cesarean section, and the surgeon was busy suturing the uterus, and the suture went right into my finger, through the glove, into my fingertip. And in those days, we didn't know as much about HIV as we do now. You know, that would have been in the late 80s, early 90s, and had to go and report it and, you know, fill in all the paperwork and get tested. And I had to wait a month for my results, and I had to take the ARVs in that time. And sure, it was like a daily panic because, as you say, there was this perception that it was a death sentence, not just a life sentence. So what do you do with all the feelings that come up for you in those situations? Because you've described a couple of, almost want to say, horror stories, like really scary situations to be in, from stressful resusces to the first resus, the first death, a couple of exposures to HIV. Like, what do you do with it? How do you get up every day and keep going and stay positive and optimistic?
That's actually a very, very good question. So I think that for me, I learned to develop coping mechanisms in university because I could tell that if I don't do anything about them now, they will come back to haunt me. I tend to be quite an avoidant person, so I don't like to confront negative feelings, whether it is crying or conflict. I will run away from. And I think that I had to be quite self-introspective about the fact that I can't run away from my mental health. And one thing that I have gotten into the habit of doing is definitely starting my day or my morning correctly and with a routine. I typically work out or go for a walk, meditate for at least 5 to 10 minutes. Occasionally I journal. I've also just recently started seeing a psychologist, but that is only because I want to have a mouthpiece that is not my own and that is not somebody that I know. Because I think that talking to friends or talking to a partner or talking to family members, they have a specific perception of you. And I think that something that somebody's told me recently is that I present myself as somebody that is perfect. And so you will go through my social media, and I think everybody does this, but I think that I have a specific way of doing it because I want to seem professional, but also relatable, but also friendly, and also a doctor at the same time. So it's quite a complicated perception to have and to kind of put out into the world. It's helped me get to where I am in the sense that I do get a lot of opportunities because of the way I'm perceived. And that is the reality. People see a beautiful picture or me wearing a fashionable item or me talking about, for example, HIV, or I'll talk about HPV. And there's just a certain perception of, oh, she's doing great. She's fine. But the reality is that no one is perfect and no one is fine. Well, most people have some issues, whichever season they're in. And I think that it's something that I've been very honest with myself, is that it is okay to actually reach out for help if you don't feel okay. And I think that with myself, I got a job recently as a medical officer just now in June. And the transition has been actually more difficult than I thought it would. I was unemployed at the beginning of the year with the rest of my class.
The
And I
800
think
doctors didn't have jobs, yeah?
yes, I was definitely one of those. And I think a lot of my colleagues actually still don't have jobs. But I recall starting work and feeling this pressure to perform, this pressure that, oh my goodness, I'm so lucky I got a job, which is the truth. But now there's the stress that to keep it, and the stress that you are an independent practitioner. And so you are expected to be a lot more experienced than, for example, an intern, of course. And so I just found that I was a little bit more hard on myself than usual. And certain things that, as I've mentioned, I don't respond to certain life events like I used to. And that worries me a little bit. And so I think I do need to at least speak to someone and see, I guess, detailing something like this, or the stories I've told you, to someone else that I don't know would make a bit of a difference.
You spoke earlier about getting to a point, I think in second or third year, where you were close to burnout and you realized that you needed help. Did you get help at that time?
There was a counselor on our campus. I think I saw her once, but I didn't go back.
What
So
stopped you from
yes,
going back?
I think at the time I convinced myself that I was fine. And I think that was a mistake. I think that especially back then, there was a perception of, if you are struggling in some sort of way in medical school, you are weak, and that you won't be a fit doctor because things get worse from here. And that is actually a lot of what people say. Someone in medical school, someone in internship will say they're struggling, and their seniors will just say, oh, just you wait, it actually gets worse. As a registrar, it's worse than this. So you just almost are told you just have to stick it out because everybody else around you is.
Sure. You told me the other day that you quite enjoyed the theory, and you've said earlier that you're a science girl, that would always have been your inclination. But then when you got into the clinical years, third year, it was like a huge shock for you.
So the second year exposure isn't as, I would say, bad as you get higher up into medical school. So I think it was fourth year that I realized just how a doctor actually functions and how they actually work is not what I saw or had in mind. I just thought, oh, I'm just going to study and then I'm going to walk on the stage and I'm a doctor. I didn't realize that even as a student, you would do 24-hour calls and that you would come across your registrars and they would be absolutely exhausted. Some of them actually just showed so much disdain for the situation they were in and the way they treated the patients as well. It would show up in that way. The way they treated us as students as well would just be an indication that they don't actually enjoy what they're doing. And that's what scared me. I really didn't want to end up like them. It's quite difficult to envision something else for yourself when everybody else around you is going through the same thing. And I think that's why when I did start seeing that there's other avenues in medicine that I can almost dabble in, it felt scary and almost like I would be judged by other doctors because no one else was doing that. And I think I made a TikTok last week. I was giving tips actually on how to improve your prospects of getting a job in this particular TikTok. And it had so much engagement and so many people were actually thankful that I made that information available for them, because I think that doctors also tend to be quite private people, or we don't like to share things. And I just shared my journey of how I got a job in the first place, what I did with my CV, how I highlighted certain things, what I did with my references. And I was very honest and said, I'm actually a very public facing doctor. I have a YouTube channel. On one day, I am literally in front of the camera, and on the next, I am putting up a drip on a patient. And a lot of people would look at me and say, she's not serious. I don't know how to put it. I almost had this feeling, especially in internship, when I had Miss South Africa and I was on television or anything like that. I almost felt like I had this internal pressure that I had to show that I'm intelligent. And so if I was asked a question, I would ensure that I'm studying the previous night, because I didn't want to be seen as incompetent or not smart enough. Just because I'm a pretty face, it doesn't mean that I don't deserve to be here. And it's been an uphill battle, honestly. I don't think I've mastered it yet. But yeah, I think I'm still learning, honestly. I'm still learning about myself. I'm still learning about where I actually envision myself, because I think that what I want for myself might not exist yet. I don't necessarily have like a mentor or a role model that I look up to and say, that is what I want. Because the things that are out there are very traditional. It's either you become a pediatrician or a neurologist. And that's just you. I think that even if I did specialize, I would see myself as wearing multiple hats.
What do you think's made it possible for you to have that perspective? Because as you say, there's a lot of the traditionals. You finish, you qualify, you specialize, and you go into one of the traditional disciplines. What's made it possible for you to imagine things outside of that domain?
I think that it's me actually seeing that things are possible that other people told me that they weren't. So a good example is me making additional money outside of my day-to-day job. A lot of people automatically, when I do tell them that actually I do make money from social media, I do get paid when I work with a brand, they're so shocked. They actually can't fathom that that's actually how things work now. Just this past month, have actually made almost close to what I earn working as a doctor, but working from social media campaigns or even from YouTube. And that to me highlights that there's a changing world, and I don't need to fit into this box where people tell you this is the only way to get there. I think that honestly, I take a gamble on myself every single day, but I think I go back to the first statement I made, which was I genuinely feel like I only have this one life and I cannot fit into people's perception of me. I can only follow my intuition, and my intuition is telling me that I'm on the right path.
I love that. I wish I had known that at your age. I think it's amazing that you know that at 28. I really do.
It takes self-belief, but also just knowing that you're taking a risk, because at the end of the day, it is a very inconsistent field. Being on social media is a scary thing, because you do not want to be perceived as an incompetent doctor. Because when people Google you, patients will Google you. Your potential employer will Google you. I've had to be very careful with ensuring that I don't blur the lines of professional versus unprofessional. It's actually been something that I've had to almost train myself to do. Yeah.
Who defines what professional is?
It depends on people. People have a very odd view of doctors. I think the public does put doctors to a specific high regard. I think that if you're on your social media, for example, smoking or something, and you have doctor in front of your title, because I have doctor in front of my social media accounts. And the reason why I do it that way is because I do know that I have a good mix of health information, a good mix of lifestyle content that I kind of mix up with health information. And so I've built my brand around that. I can't, for example, post myself in the club because I have put the title doctor in front of me. And yes, we all know that people go out and have fun. We are young, but because I have branded myself a certain way, I have to hold myself to a certain level. And I think that's what I would say makes things professional, unprofessional. If I had a private account and it was just me and my friends, I wouldn't have minded.
Right. I think that for me, it's always really interesting to consider what we mean when we say professional and how so often it's supposed to exclude anything that makes us human.
Yes.
And my first example of that, so when I first studied coaching, I was in a private practice and I closed the medical practice and started a coaching practice. And it was a very new field at that time. Health coaching was not very well known. And I had created a couple of social media. And in those days, we didn't have Instagram and Facebook. It was pre those days. And I don't even remember which platform it was. But on one of the platforms, I dared to write a little bit of my personal story. And in there, I shared about burnout and I shared about depression. I shared about being divorced and I shared something of my family background. And this post was out there, and then I got appointed to design a curriculum at Stellenbosch University. So suddenly I was employed at the medical school, and in that time I agreed to present an abstract at a conference. And I'll never forget that the person who was going to introduce me at the conference pulled me aside in the lunch break. He'd obviously gone online to search for information or Google me. And he advised me very strongly to take down that personal story because it was not appropriate.
Oh, wow.
It was not me in a club or me with a cigarette dangling from my lips. It was me sharing a personal story. And he told me that if I wanted to progress in the profession, if I wanted to be an academic, and it was my first year back at the medical school after many years, that he thought it would be prudent to take down that post.
Wow.
And I did. I went home in a complete panic and I deleted anything remotely personal about myself on the internet. Of course, nowadays I think it's much harder to do that, but
yes, that's such an interesting story, actually. And I think I share a similar sentiments when you shared a personal story about potential mental health struggles. It's actually something that I was detailing to an intern that I was working with. And they had asked me a similar story of how do I keep the balance between sharing my personal life and being vulnerable and being seen as relatable as a doctor and also just as a young woman, because I am a young woman that's going through life and learning and also trying to still stay professional, because what if you do want that registrar post at some point and the consultant that is vetting you is looking at you and another candidate? And I was quite cognizant that I've always been very aware that I try to stay clear from certain topics like mental health or my personal mental health. I would not speak about that. I would potentially talk about, oh, I've had a really difficult call and this is what happened on the call. But I wouldn't talk about how it affected me, because I always thought to myself, what if this comes back to me and they watch a video and they see, oh, this person doesn't cope well in highly stressful environments. I'm not going to employ her. And I think that it's such a sad thing about our field. We are very hard people and we are hard on each other and ourselves.
Well, when you spoke earlier about how the registrars often take it out on the younger doctors and it becomes very evident that they're unhappy in their job, I always find it fascinating that every generation of doctors will complain about the consultants or the registrars that they work with. How does it happen that young people who were so miserable as interns or as medical officers then become registrars and become those people that are making life difficult for the younger generation? Like, what is your explanation of that? How do you make sense of that?
So I've actually had almost like a 50-50 experience. I've actually had registrars that for some way and some miracle, they have maintained their love for what they do and are still very, very kind doctors and are willing to teach. And I think that is something I've always gravitated towards, people that are willing to teach, because we do not become great doctors by people shouting at us and berating you for making a mistake or not knowing something. I will always remember the registrars and the consultants that would always sit us down and actually take us through something, because those are the people that actually make you a better doctor. I personally feel that we do have a new generation of doctors that are a little bit more aware and are actively trying to not repeat the mistakes. I do think, however, there will always be a level of toxicity in medicine. I don't know how we combat that. It is the fact that we just have such little resources and you're just expected to smile and take it, regardless of whether you didn't sleep the whole night, whether you saw 50 patients and you didn't have anything to eat the night before or even had time to go to the bathroom. You're still expected to smile and take it. And I think that changes you. That experience changes you as a person. And so I actually don't blame the people that change, because unfortunately you almost go into this mode where you just need to get to the finish line, and how you get there, you don't care at that point. You're just trying to preserve yourself and just graduate.
So what keeps you going?
What keeps me going is that I truly believe that I want to live a passionate and exciting life. I see myself achieving things that I don't want to say right now, because I think that I want to show it rather than say it. And I think that I'm a woman of my actions, and I really think that I'm driven by just living a full life in every aspect. So I don't let my career define me. I don't let people define me. I'm just driven by being excited by life. It's important that you self-introspect and you realize what actually brings you happiness. And for me, just recently starting in my work now, I've realized that because I work less hours, I don't do calls anymore, by the way. I only work from Monday to Friday. I have my weekends. I've realized just how much I love medicine again. And I've realized just how much energy I have when I see each patient. Even if I have a full day of patients and I'm really inundated with work, I just ensure that I make that patient interaction the best that they'll remember, because a lot of the times we forget that patients wake up early in the morning at like 4:30 a.m. to come see us, and they have that small, maybe 5-minute interaction with you, and that is what they remember forever. And what you tell them as a doctor can be one of the scariest things in their life. For you telling them, oh, you've got diabetes, and for them, their parent died from diabetes. That is a life-altering moment for them. And I know that we typically just rush through certain things because we just want to get over it with and done. But I think that now that I have more time for myself and I'm not overworked, I'm actually a better doctor. It's making me excited to learn again. I'm coming back home and studying again. And I think that that was something that I lost in internship in ComServe. I was just so exhausted. I barely studied.
And I'm sure there's people out there wondering, so how is it that you don't have to work weekends and nights? Tell us a bit about how that works.
In family medicine, but I sometimes work in some of the clinics and sometimes at the hospital. But I have opted out of commuted overtime because there is the option to opt out.
Right.
The reason why I opted out was simply because I actually had exams, my diploma in HIV management, which I wrote, and I also have an upcoming examination in my diploma in mental health. Because I did 3 months of psychiatry last year, I just decided I might as well just write the diploma. And I needed the time to study, so I just could not do overtime and study at the same time. So that's why I opted out.
I imagine those jobs are more readily available now that the public sector is struggling to get funding. It might be easier for them not to have to pay the commuted overtime, but then that adds to the burden of the doctors who are doing the overtime.
Exactly. It was actually in our contract that they did not offer commuted overtime at the beginning, but now that more funding has come out, they have asked for people who want to do it.
What do you love about medicine?
I love that medicine is ever changing. I think that there's always something new to learn. What I learned in medical school, which was literally 4 years ago, has changed. I think that it keeps me on my toes. I love a challenge and improving myself. I think that self-improvement is one of my life goals. I want to be the best version of myself. So I love that it just teaches me something new every day. I think that it also reminds me how human I am. and reminds me, I guess, how valuable life is, as I've said before.
Is there anything you dislike about medicine?
The hours. The hours and the occasional level of toxicity, of course. Yes.
Do you have any examples of that toxicity that you'd be willing to share?
Yes, I mean, I think there's a lot of toxicity in the sense that there are people that look down on you based on what level you're in. So a registrar or a community service doctor, which is so shocking to me, would look down on an intern or bully an intern in the same way a consultant bullying a registrar. Those are the things that I truly do not understand. And I think there's also a level of unprofessionalism that I've experienced where you would be discussing a patient with a doctor, asking for help and clearly needing the help, and they would just drop the phone on you. It's become a norm, actually. If, for example, you're stuck in a small place and you don't have the resources and you want to transfer a patient out who is quite literally dying on the table, and people don't respond to that anymore. So that's something I definitely don't enjoy.
I can imagine. Anything we haven't talked about that you want to share?
Question that I've been dying to ask.
Oh, yes.
While you're in this difficult experience of medical school, and it's so intense and so hectic, and you've got all this pressure and you're trying to be perfect, how does the idea of, I think I'll enter Miss South Africa come? Where does that come from? Because it's just like, sorry, what? Why would you do that? I'm just really interested.
Oh, yes, of course. I think I mentioned at the beginning that I tend to take on quite a lot out of choice. And I always have to stop myself. I think even right now, I have a shoot tomorrow, very early in the morning with very big fashion brand. And then after that, I've got a campaign about period poverty because I speak about reproductive health and I speak about educating, especially young girls, about their reproductive health. So I'm working with SPA. And so I'm going to be attending a netball match. And then I have to study as well because I've got my exams. But how I came about deciding to do Miss South Africa was honestly, it was actually just something that I'd always wanted to do since I was very, very young. I was one of those girly girls that watched TV and saw the Miss South Africa women and thought to myself, they are so well put together and they look so beautiful. But not only are they beautiful, they're also very smart. And I remember looking at them, especially when I was younger, there wasn't much representation back then in terms of body sizes, even skin color, because I think back then there weren't very many women of color that actually won Miss South Africa. And I just thought to myself, well, if I don't see it, I'm going to become it.
Wow.
And that's basically what made me get the courage to enter Miss SA. And also after medical school, I wanted to finish medical school first. That was my very first priority. I needed to get my degree and then I would pursue my other passions.
Anything else you want to say about that, Amy?
So this podcast is all about changing perceptions of what everyday people think doctors are. I must say, I had a perception of who I thought a Miss South African contestant was, or what kind of woman would enter a contest like that. You've got all these perceptions of beauty queens and what that's about. And I've just been listening to all of your answers. I love the fact that your answers are quote unquote perfect. Like you answer everything like a beauty queen. You answer everything like you are in a pageant, like you have an answer for every single question. But I also love the fact that you're also incredibly authentic at the same time. So it's perfect, but it's also honest and it's real. Whereas sometimes you have that thing where the answer is incredibly polished, but it's quite fake.
Yes.
You were talking about social media and people's perception of you and whether you would get a job or not. And I think that's very politics. So if you're in politics, you're not allowed to be shown being a human because that'll come and bite you later. And it's kind of the same thing where if you're on social media, you have to be a certain way because that can come and bite you later. Another thing that I wanted to ask was, obviously got a very busy life and you're doing so many different things and coming across so many different people, and you have a very different way of seeing the world and thinking. How do you deal with the social media aspect in terms of there must be elements of people around you that are jealous, there's cancel culture, or trying to sabotage, like that, where people are taking out phones and sticking it in your face and they're like, actually, that doesn't work with my brand. How do you navigate that? Because I think social media is incredibly tricky in that way. When people think, especially if you're a public figure, then people think they own you. And then they think they have a right to selfie, or they have a right to film you.
Yeah, so you're right. Luckily enough, that hasn't happened to me yet. I haven't been caught doing something that I probably would not want to be seen doing, but sometimes there is a level of backlash on social media itself where you get negative comments where people will say, I don't think a doctor should be sharing that, or just weird things, because as I said, people have this perception that the doctor doesn't look like me. And a lot of my videos, I'm actually quite dressed up. I put on makeup and I've got like my hair in curls, and I actually do look like a beauty queen in that moment, but then I'll be talking about something serious. I'll tell you to go get your pap smear, all dolled up. And I think that there's a level of like, people just have this weird thing where they're like, no, are you sure this is a doctor? I actually had somebody ask me, are you guys sure this is not a Dr. Matthew situation? And I don't know if you are aware of Dr. Matthew, but he was somebody that was on social media, specifically on TikTok, but he wasn't actually a doctor, but was disseminating all of this information. He had hundreds and thousands of followers, almost 300,000 followers. And he created this persona of being a doctor, and it all came out that he actually wasn't. And he had been going into hospitals. He actually went into Baragwanath Hospital, Helen Joseph Hospital, filming himself in the hospital in the casualty and disseminating all this incorrect medical information. And so somebody wrote that under one of my comments, and I genuinely was so shocked. But luckily, there's some people that actually don't know me personally, but they actually wrote, no, we know her. She did Miss South Africa. You can check her. She's on the HPCSA registry. And so there are some people that actually do come to your defense in situations like that as well. So yes, it is quite difficult navigating this space, I think. It's learning on the go. But I do think that I double check my information. Even when I speak about certain topics, I need to ensure that it is the latest evidence-based medicine. I can't just talk about anything and just disseminate it, because at the end of the day, there are doctors that are also following me and checking and looking at my social media. And I do not want to be anything other than honest and true.
So if I asked you to describe your brand, what would you say? Who is Dr. Moratwe Masima?
I think Dr. Moratwe Masima is a driven dreamer. That is the best way to describe it, because I think that I'm driven in everything that I do, and I think that I do everything with intention, because I want to have an intentional life. I want to live an intentional life. A dreamer is because I followed a non-traditional way of doing things. I have traditional aspects, which is my day-to-day job, which obviously is important and sustains me, but I have not forgotten about the young Moratwe that dreamed big. And I think that I've honored her as well, and I've honored that side of myself.
I love that. Yeah. Love the innocence of that. I'm so used to having conversations with doctors who are tired or burnt out or so overwhelmed by the responsibilities, and you haven't glossed over those, but you've also found a way to hold on to more aspects of who you are and what is important to you. And I think that that makes you a multifaceted human being. And maybe not that the others aren't, but that you're allowing yourself to follow other avenues and to express other parts of you quite openly and quite visibly. And I think that's rare. There's something really courageous about that. I've used that word a couple of times to describe you, but I think there's also something...
It's scary.
You said earlier when I said something similar, and you said, but I doubt myself a lot. And that's what makes it courageous. Like if you were confidently cruising along, then there's no courage required. The fact that you're doubting, and the fact that there isn't a map, and the fact that you say quite openly that in your mind, one, you don't have any role models. There's no one that I will look up to and go, that's the trajectory I want to follow. That's what I want my career to be about. It makes you a pioneer. I feel like you're walking on the edge of a paradigm, and you're going to be one of the forerunners of figuring out how we do this.
Oh, thank you. I didn't think of myself that way.
One of the best words I've found to describe it, because pioneer doesn't always sit comfortably with me, but the idea of being an edge walker makes sense for me. That resonates. Kind of walking on the edge of a paradigm, not quite sure what's next, but willing to take the risk, willing to dive into the unknown and explore and risk putting yourself out there and being judged and being criticized. I think that's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So what's next for Dr. Moratwe? You said you don't want to say too much about what you're dreaming of, but give us a hint as to what you're hoping would be next for you.
So I would definitely say that it has something to do with being in a magazine. And just think of my age. That's as much I'm going to give.
Okay. I'll let you get away with that. What advice would you have for a young woman who's at school at the moment and thinking about her future and weighing up the career options and considering things as diverse as chemical engineering and medical school?
I think the advice that I wish I had was to do your research. I think that, yes, it's common sense, but I think that a lot of the times when you are in an environment that maybe hasn't exposed you to those things before, you just feel that it's impossible to get any information on things. I think it might be slightly easier now. People are a lot more open and there's more information just on the internet about what certain careers look like. But with myself, I just almost took a leap of faith and just had to learn on the go. I don't necessarily have regrets about my choices in medicine. I don't think that I would be the Moratwe that I am now. And so I wouldn't change it. As much as it was difficult and as much as it is continuing to be difficult, because we're learning that doctors don't have jobs. We're learning that you need to keep studying forever. And it really actually never ends. I accept those realities and it still makes me enjoy my job regardless.
Anything you want to ask, Amy?
I'm just actually really excited to see where you end up because
Thank you. I'm also excited.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. If you do things differently, it can be very lonely because there is no blueprint and there is nobody showing you the way. There is no guide. You are the guide. You are the one forging the path. It can be incredibly difficult because you can't really relate to other people, because you think so differently. You think differently if you're an outlier. You're on your own because you don't fit in. And I think it can be very tricky. But you are definitely somebody that is very inspiring.
Thank you.
It's going to really help a lot of people. I can see that just by the way that you think and the fact that you are, like you said, you're a driven dreamer. Like, it's so important to have dreams, especially in this country where things can be so exceptionally hard. It's important that you can look at and go, well, if she's doing it, maybe I can do it. And not necessarily in the same way, but I love the fact that you're all dolled up while giving your medical information. I think that's beautiful. Like, why not? Why can't you be the beauty queen that's also really brilliant? That's the whole point in South Africa. The whole point is to show, like, yes, you can have brains and beauty. You can do both. Why do you just have to be beautiful? So I think that's very powerful, and I think it's just exciting. So congratulations. I just think you have such a beautiful, bright future ahead.
Thank you. Thank you.
And for the people that are listening, Moratwe, if this is an opportunity for you in the sense that you have had a chance to share some of your personal story and reveal some of who you are, what's the one thing you really hope people will take away after having listened to your story?
I think that one thing I've had to learn to do, it's taken such a long time, and I think I'm still honestly working on it, is being okay with failing. I think in a world where you just see people that are being successful and winning at everything in life because they only post that side, it's so important to remind yourself that a lot of us didn't get here just because. I detail the fact that I did struggle in medical school. There are certain subjects or modules that I really, truly did not get. They just did not make sense to me, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how many hours I put in, and I had to rewrite those exams. It doesn't take away from me as a doctor now, because I had to go through that module again to be a better doctor. And I think that in the moment, it feels like your whole world is falling apart, but I know that it just made me a better doctor. And so I would say that people shouldn't be afraid to fail. I would say that people shouldn't also be afraid to, once again, dream. The failing and the dreaming are tandem, because when you dream, you are bound to fail at something. It's inevitable. On my journey to success, I envisioned, obviously, for example, winning Miss South Africa. That was what I wanted. That is not what happened. And I think that I also had to sit with that and accept that I was so close, but I was also so far away. And I think that was something that I also had to really accept, that I may have not won, but I've gotten so much from it as well. that has made me who I am now. And I also probably wouldn't change the outcome, because who knows where I would be. I don't know if I'd still even be practicing as a doctor.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's going to stay with you at the end of this conversation?
I'm actually really, really glad that I took the opportunity to do the podcast. I think that it's also helping me reflect. It's quite easy when you're living your day-to-day life to forget that you've gone through certain things, and it's helped me reflect. It's helped me think about how actually I'm really grateful about where I am right now, because I was a 14-year-old girl that didn't come from much and had to kind of find her way in this world with a lot of challenges and a lot of things stacked against me. And now I look back and I'm just like, oh my goodness, I kind of did it. So yes,
Well
thank you
done.
for having me.
Thank you for your willingness to be on the podcast and to share some of your story. And as Amy said, I think we're all going to be very excited to see what unfolds for you. And when I say that, I really want to emphasize that that includes the times when it's going to be hard. I'm not imagining that everything's always going to be perfect, but I think you have what it takes to navigate those things. I'm excited about what you will contribute to the world and what you will model for the next generation. So thank you for everything that you are and everything that you bring.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Those are beautiful words.
I'm Dr. Maria Christodoulou, and you've been listening to the Awakening Doctor podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with your friends, follow Awakening Doctor on Instagram, Facebook, and Spotify, and go to Apple Podcasts to subscribe, rate, and give us a good review. Thank you so much for listening.